jokingly said to the waiter he's in the friend zone and not my husband, but he took it serious and left.
I'm about to lose my mind from frustration as his silence and absence is slowly eating me up. I have nowhere else to turn to, and I had no choice but to come here on Reddit to let everything out. I need advice. I'm really desperate right now. I've been crying for days now, and it's been over a month since that day. The day I messed up and it cost me my happiness. How do you turn back time so you could escape from making that one mistake? A mistake that felt so right at that moment and was supposed to be an innocent joke. An innocent joke one could just laugh about and then move on from it the next moment. But then it turned out to be one that turned sweet memories to nightmares. If only I could take it back. If only I could, I'd reverse the night I referred to my marriage as being in the friend zone. I had said it as a joke, but then that one joke led to my dirty secrets being revealed one after another, and I am at the verge of losing everything. Every time I think about it, the fact that my cover was blown and everything came to light from just one joke still chokes me. I have been crying so much for days now as I spend my days in my lonely office and my night in my cold room, hoping everything would return to how it once was. My name is Betty. I'm 31 years old. I met my husband Mark when we both started out together as interns in the company we are currently working in. Mark was always a sweet person, so welcoming and very easy to get along with despite his introverted personality. He was so kind and very good looking. He always had this radiant smile on his face, one that could turn stressful work hours to an easy and bright day with just his presence. His soft personality made it easy for him to get along with everyone around him, and they all loved him too. He had a lot of admirers, as every lady in the company wanted to have a piece of him, which made me feel so high and special when he started taking interest in me. We started dating, and I felt so pleased with all the attention I was getting, as I could see ladies in our company burn from jealousy each time Mark sweetly took care of me, and it made me feel so good. Everything was rosy, and we had been so happy together. After completing our internship, we both got accepted officially to the company as permanent staff. During our team dinner, Mark had prepared a surprise proposal and had asked me to marry him. I knew he had to go out of his shell to do that considering his closed lifestyle, but because he knew I loved those kinds of things, he had to do it just so I could be happy. Mark loved me so much that I was confident I had him wrapped around my fingers. He always said yes to everything I wanted and was ready to give his all just so I could be comfortable. I guess that made me so comfortable that I had unknowingly started to put myself first before him and ended up taking his love for granted. I feel it all started the day we were called to the main office by our CEO. I and Mark had been the spotlight of the company, and the company had decided to promote one of us. We were to be graded by our performance at the end of the week and through the votes from our colleagues. Obviously, I knew I didn't stand a chance. I was good at my job, but when it came to my colleagues, I knew Mark was going to outshine me. I was fine with it, as Mark and I had agreed that it doesn't matter who ends up getting the promotion. Whoever wins for the both of us since we are one. I was happy just hearing his words, but then I started to think differently when I let my emotions get the best of me. I often heard the rest of our colleagues gossip about me and my husband secretly at each little chance they got. They kept talking about how undeserving I am of the position and saying I shouldn't even be Mark's rival, as he is by far on another level compared to me. They went on saying Mark should have been paired up with Diana, as she is a better candidate compared to me. Hearing Diana's name being mentioned got me riled up and upset, especially with the fact that I was well aware about her feelings for my husband. Diana has always had her eyes on Mark from day one, and she has been so persistent and resilient, although Mark never reciprocated her feelings and married me instead. Since then, everyone in the company had been so bitter about it and kept saying that Mark was too good for me and Diana was the better choice for him. Hearing them still place her above me and even comparing me to my husband made me so upset, and something in me changed, and this time I was determined to win. I desperately wanted to win that I sometimes caught myself getting jealous of my husband, and most times I'd purposely hide certain information just so I could be a step ahead of him with my performances. But none of that really mattered to Mark, as he always placed me first before anything. So giving up on the promotion that day was just so easy for him to do, as my happiness always came before his. My fearful thoughts came to reality as Mark had the highest vote and was chosen for the promotion on that day. But to everyone's surprise, including me, he gave up on the position and handed it over to me. I was just as shocked as everyone, but I was also the happiest in the building that day. Our CEO had prepared for a team dinner the next day to congratulate me on my promotion. I just couldn't wait to attend the gathering that night so I could show off and rub it to the faces of all those that gossiped so much behind my back, and also flaunt my husband's love for me to Diana's face so she could see one more time just how much I meant to Mark, and how impossible her wish to get Mark was going to be futile. On the day of the dinner that I anticipated so much, Mark had come down with a cold and had decided to go home as he couldn't join us for the team dinner anymore. Instead of feeling worried and going after my husband, I had shamelessly finished my work for the day and gone for the team dinner as nothing mattered to me other than that. Each time I think about that day, I feel ashamed of myself and I deeply regret it. But what's the point? What is done is done. And regretting it now cannot change the past, which is such a painful reality. I had partied so hard that night that I had lost track of time and had not noticed Mark's calls. After the gathering ended, I took out my phone to order a taxi, and that was when I saw all of Mark's missed calls and his message. His condition had gotten worse that he had to go to the hospital. Reading the message ignited a deep feeling of guilt in me that I hurried to the address of the hospital he had sent to me. When I got to the hospital, the guilt I was feeling was suddenly replaced by anger and jealousy as I saw Diana there. She was already so busy looking after Mark, and it upset me so much to see her doing all that. I immediately approached them, and instead of asking my husband about his condition or speaking to his doctor to know what went wrong, instead I picked a fight with Diana, and we both ended up being kicked out of the hospital, embarrassing ourselves. At least one would feel embarrassed after that, but I wasn't. Instead, I was so angry with my husband that I had refused to visit him for the remaining 2 days he spent in the hospital before getting discharged. I had returned from work that day, and Mark had prepared a surprise dinner for me. He had cooked my favorite food and bought me flowers, and the moment I got home, he got on one knee and apologized for the incident that happened in the hospital. No. He explained to me that he had no idea that Diana would follow him when he got off from work. She claimed she had noticed his condition, and she wanted to be certain he was okay. She had offered to give him a ride home since I was not available, and he had no choice as he wasn't in the condition to refuse. He had barely gotten home when his condition worsened, and since she was the only one around at the moment, she had taken him to the hospital. He apologized and promised me nothing like that was ever going to happen again. We had dinner together that night and even made love after. Months after that, Mark started to express his need and wish for us to start a family together. He wanted us to start having kids, and I still remember the level of happiness that dazzled in his eyes that day when we talked about it, and any woman or wife would definitely want to fulfill such a wish for her husband. He said he is always going to be there for me, and he was willing to support me and our child if I ever felt the load was too much for me. I had someone this sweet. Now I ask myself, why was I so blinded to have realized it? What do I do now that I'm about to lose everything? My boss had called for me that day and offered me a big contract. Our company had been planning for an expansion into the global market, and we had just found foreign investors to make that happen for us. The project was handed to me, and I had to do everything possible to make sure the client seals the deal. I started coming home late from work, and I was so busy that I hardly had time for my husband anymore, but Mark tried to be understanding. Most times he would always wait up with me at work and assist me until I'm done, and most times he would prepare dinner and wait at home until I returned. I would most times refuse to eat even after he had put in so much effort, claiming I was exhausted, and sometimes I'd tell him I had eaten dinner already with my boss, and without realizing it, I had started drifting away from my husband. One of the moments I regret the most was the day I embarrassed my husband in front of everyone in the company. Mark was supposed to give a presentation to our client that day, but he had suddenly vanished an hour to the time for the presentation. I was left in a tight spot as the head and leader of the project, and the clients left so disappointed that day, leaving me in a tough spot. My husband later returned, but I had exploded at him that day, saying so many hurtful things to him. I even went as far as saying he was just jealous of me, and that's why he wasn't happy about my success, and he is now trying to bring me down. How could I have said all those things to him? This is the same person that gave up on his promotion for me to get to where I am now. Looking back, I loathe myself so much for that. Just as always, my husband still apologized and tried to make up with me. He even made up for his absence at the meeting by giving an appealing presentation on the day the meeting was rescheduled, which made our foreign investors pleased as they kept praising me nonstop about it. And that was how I warmed up to my husband again, but still, that didn't change me. I became a workaholic, and it got to a point that I'd only come home in the morning, take a shower, and then return to the office again. That day, my husband was so concerned that it turned to him being upset about me overstressing myself. He didn't like me suffering, and he felt that the job was wearing me out. So he asked if he should talk to our boss about it, and I said no. And he told me that if I ever felt overwhelmed, like the job was too much for me, that I am free to express myself to him, and that he would understand. And even if I wanted to quit, and he would support me, and he was willing to take care of me. He said that because I was always overstressed and complaining each time I returned from work. But instead of acknowledging his kind words, I would always get angry, saying nothing mattered to me other than that contract. And if he really loved me like he claimed, he would support me. I would always avoid discussing the topic of having a baby each time he tried to bring it up, as I could not afford to get pregnant just when I was at the peak of exploring my career, and I was too blinded to even realize how much Mark was hurting. To make things worse, I had secretly started sleeping with the foreign investors just so I could get the deal. It happened after I overheard Diana and her clique talking. They said they were sure the deal with the foreign investor was going to fall through, and they had heard rumors of our rival company making an attempt to seal the deal with them first, and that I do not stand a chance. They went on saying I deserved it for acting all high and mighty and even treating my husband the way I did. Their words had barely sunk in when I got a call from the investor saying he had seen a better company to place his money in, and he wanted to pull out. I felt like a knife had cut through me, and coupled with the words of Diana, I couldn't imagine the level of shame and embarrassment I'd have to face if it really came to reality. I pleaded and tried to make him stay, and he had suggested we meet up and talk about it. And that was how one meeting turned into a sin. A sin I had done not considering how much it was going to hurt my husband. Every time I look back, I wonder how important I thought that deal was to do something like that, and if things would have turned out differently if I had just stopped then. If I had not bothered about what people would say or think, would things have been different for me? In hindsight, I should have stopped. It wasn't worth it. I don't know why I had to do what I did. I met with the foreign investor, and after much argument and pleading, he finally asked me to prove just how much this deal meant to me. I told him I'd be willing to do anything to see that this deal pushed through, as I am betting everything on it. After hearing my statement, he started making advances towards me, touching my thighs and making seductive moves at me. I wanted to refuse, but then I knew if I did that, I'd be kissing goodbye to the contract, and that alone scared me. I could already picture Diana's and the rest of my colleagues laughing and rubbing my failure to my face, and the mere thought of it was so embarrassing to bear. Driven by my foolish pride, I succumbed to the temptation, and that's how I slept with my client. If I had stopped there, maybe I would have earned forgiveness from fate, but then I continued. I experienced a different kind of pleasure with my client, one that I hardly felt with my husband Mark. Unlike Mark, who felt our home was happiness and all he could ever ask for, my client's vibe matched mine, as he was the type who loved to have fun and explore. The time we made love was one of the best experiences of my life, as I often found myself waiting and calling for him. I started to find my husband boring, as even our intimate moment together no longer felt exciting to me. Just like that, I started meeting up more often with my client, and before I knew it, I had completely turned something so shameful into something pleasurable. Most times when I get home after my meeting with my client, I'd feel so guilty, especially seeing how much Mark kept trying for the both of us. At some point, I started to feel sorry for him, but I just couldn't stop. Finally, the deal got approved just as I had wanted. Our team had decided to get together and celebrate, but my husband suggested we both eat out together alone. He said he missed our moments together, and since the deal was finally over, we should both try to rekindle our relationship once more. Hearing that, I immediately canceled my meeting with my client for that day, and also canceled the team dinner and joined my husband. We had finished having dinner and decided to have a few more drinks together before going home. My husband had just gone to the restroom when I got a text from my client. Before I knew what happened, I was smiling like an idiot and texting back that I had completely forgotten I was on a date with my husband. As fate would have it, I didn't realize a waiter had been observing us. When he came to serve our drinks, he smiled and complimented us and stated that my husband is really sweet and good-looking, and it's clear how happy I am and that I am lucky to have him. My husband had just returned from the restroom, and as he sat down, I jokingly said to the waiter, "He's not my husband. We're in the friend zone." To my surprise, my husband took it seriously. His smile disappeared, and without a word, he stood up and left, leaving me stunned. The waiter, who had just been trying to be friendly, seemed equally confused. I was confused and surprised about his sudden reaction that I went after him, but he had left with our car already. I took a taxi and went after him, and when I got home, he was in the living room with a small luggage. I was confused for a moment when I rushed to him and tried to explain to him that I didn't mean what I said, and it was just a harmless joke. and just then he took out a pink pack that I do keep my supplements. Seeing the bag in his hands, I almost passed out. Without giving me a chance to say anything, he furiously turned everything in the pack out, and just then my sin was staring at me. I had left the contraceptive pills I was taking in there. My lips started shaking as I could not find my voice to say anything. The next thing he said was if the pills are also a joke too. He asked me if I hated the fact of having his kids that much that I had to dwell on contraceptives. He had called the clinic I had been receiving the drugs from, and I had been taking them since the time he brought up his interest of starting a family with me. He asked if I hated him that much and didn't consider him a husband to the point of not wanting to have kids with him, and that if I was disgusted with the idea, I should have just told him about it. How do I explain to my husband that I have been sleeping with someone else, and I had taken the pills to prevent myself from getting pregnant so I could never get caught? I tried pleading, but he didn't spare me a second look and stormed out of the house. I have not set my eyes on my husband since that night. He had taken a leave from work and had ghosted me since then. Diana had also taken a leave, and the thought of them being together is about to make me lose my mind. How do I amend this? How do I tell my husband the pills were not because of him? Explaining the truth surrounding the pills will surely bring out the truth about my disgusting affair. I've not been able to focus on anything as I'm scared the truth would come to light any time, and the anxiety is killing me. I miss my husband so much, and I sincerely love him. I don't want to lose my husband in our marriage. Please, I need help and advice. What do I do? Update.
And
It's true when they say that people only know the value of what they have, when they have finally lose it, and Mark's absence in my life has made me realize the true meaning to those words. How do you make amends for hurting the one person that meant the world and more to you? Is there still a possibility that things could return to the way it used to be? Why did things have to get to this before I could finally realize how broken things were between us? I had been indirectly hurting the one person that was real in my life. Mark finally showed up after ghosting me for more than a month. He refused to tell me where he had been, as he had been giving me silent treatment, and refused to even look at me. I can't even bring myself to ask him anything. I desperately wanted to know where he had been and if he was with Diana, but then he has refused to spend even a second in the same place with me, which is so frustrating. I try to approach him, but the Mark that returned after a month is a completely different person, as he had started to act differently. Mark wasn't a party type as such. He always refused joining team dinners and preferred to eat at home. But ever since Mark got back, he started clubbing with his friends and would always join our colleagues at work for team dinners and birthday parties. Just mention anything you wanted to celebrate, and Mark was ready to join. He became so distant from me, and he had refused to sleep in the same room with me and has been sleeping in the room he had prepared for our child if ever we had one. Seeing him act this way breaks my heart so much. How could someone change this much? Is it even possible for me to have my old husband back? I had complained to my mom about it, and she blamed me so much, and she claimed that everything was my fault and that she admired Mark so much for being so patient for that long. She even went on telling me that the day I had lashed out on him because he missed the company meeting was because of her. She had been rushed to the hospital after she collapsed due to her high blood pressure, and no one could reach me, and they had no choice but to call my husband. He had responded and hurried down there in no time, and he stayed by her side until she woke up and only left when he was certain she was fine. He had stopped her from telling me about it, claiming he didn't want to add to my worries. And I had a lot going on at work even when I had misunderstood him and ignored him for days. He claimed it was his fault and he was going to make it up to me. I broke down in tears after hearing my mom's words. I felt terrible for cheating and hurting him. I hurried home to talk to Mark. I was ready to do everything to make up with my husband, even if I had to force him to talk to me. The Mark I knew would never be mad at me forever, and he was always weak when it came to me. I was willing to make him happy and make up for everything I had done, but my wishes and plans had shattered even before I could do anything. I hurried home and prepared our favorite food for dinner, waiting for him to come home. When Mark returned, I rushed to hug him, but he rejected me. My husband had not said a word to me for a month now, and that night the first word that came out of his mouth was, "Let's get divorced." I was so stunned when I heard those words from him, but before I could react, he had placed the divorce papers on the table along with pictures of me and the foreign investors in bed together. The same table I had decorated just so we could start our marriage all over again. I felt so weak on my feet that I had sunk to the floor as the pictures in front of me squeezed all the strength I had left in me. I started crying and begging Mark. I begged him to forgive me, claiming it was a mistake and I regretted it so much, but Mark wouldn't listen. He was furious. He started yelling and asking me if the contract meant that much to me that I had willingly chosen to jeopardize our marriage. He asked if I had for once considered how much of a damage this might cause to our marriage and myself. He said he was an idiot, and looking back at everything, he realized he was even a bigger idiot for trusting and loving someone so selfish like me. He spelt out how much of an embarrassment I was to him, and he hated himself for ever loving someone like me. I cried so hard, begging and rolling on the floor, but the more I begged, the more furious he got. He sent all the food I had prepared flying and breaking things, the more I wailed. I had never seen Mark that way. He threatened to hurt me if I did not sign the divorce papers that instant. I kept begging, but Mark was harder than a rock. He was red with anger that I was so scared, and I immediately signed the divorce papers. He threw my stuff out of the house and swore to hurt me if he ever saw me again. And just like that, Mark shut me out of his life. Rumors about my infidelity went around the company, and the fact that I got the deal by sleeping with the investor was everyone's topic to discuss. The company had to let me go, as keeping me would bring more damage to their company name. Diana walked up to me the day I got fired and told me I should have been more careful if I wanted to remain Mark's wife. She told me she hated me so much for hurting someone like him. She confessed that no matter how much she tried, Mark had never seen her more than a friend. She even went as far as following him when he went on the leave, but Mark had treated her even worse than a stranger, claiming he loved me so much and he doesn't want to hurt me. He only needed some time alone, and he was going to go back to me once he had cooled off. She confessed that hearing him say that made her so upset that he was so in love with someone like me, and that I didn't deserve him, as she was aware I was cheating on him. She knew telling him would hurt him, but when he rejected her and left to return to me, she just couldn't hold it any longer, and had to send him the beautiful photos. She concluded by saying if she couldn't have Mark, then she would make sure I as well do not have him. And from the start, I did not deserve someone so precious like Mark. I broke down in tears after hearing all that, and she just left me there. Mark had accepted a promotion and was transferred to work in the company's branch abroad. He had bid his goodbye to my mom, and that was the last I heard of him. I have lived my life since then in regret, as crying has not changed anything for me. I had received a lot of hate and a lot of people pointing fingers at me, saying a lot of bad things about me. I know I messed up, and I have no excuse for it. I wish Mark all the best in life, and I hope he could move on and forget about someone like me. This is going to be my last update. I will live the rest of my colorless life paying for what I did to Mark, as I know I do not even deserve to be happy. I sometimes find myself wishing everything could become a dream, and when I wake up, Mark would be smiling beside me, but then it's never happening. If fate would allow, I would love to meet Mark again, even if I have to watch him from afar. Now I have nothing but regrets left. I keep praying for a second chance. If it were possible, I'd like to make up for everything I did to Mark. Even if I know I can't undo what I did, I'd still want to apologize. Now all I can do is wish and hope that day that comes would shine a glimpse of light in the darkness I am stuck in, as my life has reached its end. Hello, kind people of Reddit. It's hard for me not to feel scared and open as I sit down to write this. Sharing my personal story with people I don't know is scary, but I know deep down that I need to do it. My shoulders have been heavy with this weight for too long. It's time for me to let it go. Now I'm going to tell you my story about how my marriage to a football player fell apart because of my greed. I, a female 28, was married to my husband, male 30, for 2 years. My husband was a rising football player, and I was a housewife. We have no children. So, let me tell you from the beginning. I grew up in a small town in a middle-class family. Actually, it was lower middle class. My father used to drive a school bus while my mother was a stay-at-home mom. I had seen the struggles my parents went through to provide for us. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful for everything they did, but I wanted more. Because of how simple our living situation was, there wasn't much room for extras or niceties. My brothers and I shared a bedroom when we were kids. Our beds were so close to each other that we could feel each other's breath while we slept. The floors creaked and the walls were peeling. No matter how much my mom cleaned, the smell of dampness stayed. Financial limitations ruled our lives, forcing us to make do with what little we had. Hand-me-down clothes, patched-up shoes, and simple meals became the norm. I too wanted the designer bags my friends owned, or the international trips their parents took them to, whereas my parents could only provide us with the basic necessities. I used to dream of things which seemed like they were out of my reach. I wanted to be able to travel the world, wear designer clothes, and live in a big house. As I got older, I got more determined to have that life for me. I came to the city looking for a job a few years back where I met my ex-husband. I was working in a bar, and my roommate was invited to some fancy party. She asked me if I wanted to join her. I had never attended a party like this. I decided maybe this party could bring me some opportunities. I remember that party distinctively. It was on a weekend night, and I was happy about it because it meant that I didn't have to take a day off from my work. We made our way to the party. I had borrowed my dress from my friend because I didn't own anything fancy for a party like this with me. Me and my friend were standing near the bar when we spotted a young guy surrounded by a group of girls. He was the highlight of that party. My friend then told me that he is a rising football player in the city and comes from a wealthy family. I kept looking in his direction, thinking how lucky he was to have that kind of life. When my friend saw me staring at him, she told me I should go and introduce myself. It was part of networking and all. I thought that something worse could already happen to me. I made my way to him and introduced myself. Usually famous people were snobby, but he wasn't. He was genuine and kind. I liked talking to him. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After some time, I excused myself, but we exchanged numbers. I didn't really expect anything except that maybe he would refer to me as someone who needed an employee. He surprised me when he texted me a few days later. He asked me how I was doing and if I would like to meet him for a drink. I couldn't stop smiling at his text and then replied, yes. We met in a very fancy restaurant. I would have felt totally out of place, but he made me comfortable and made sure that I had a good night. That's how we started dating. Dating him completely changed my life. I felt like I was living in some Disney movie or shit. He would give me such expensive gifts. I started owning brands I didn't even know existed. My friends started getting jealous of me. I loved it. It was the first time someone was jealous of me. It wasn't like he was completely flawless. He had his flaws. Sometimes he would disappear for days and then come back like nothing had happened. I asked him 2 or 3 times, but when it seemed like he was getting angry over it, I used to drop it. I didn't want to upset him. He was my ticket to the dreams I had always dreamt since I was a child. He could give me all the luxuries and vacations I wanted, and that too, without working for it. I just had to keep him happy. I did everything possible to keep him happy. I used to cook him meals, everything and anything he asked for. I made sure I did it. After a while of dating, we went on a vacation. I didn't have to pay a penny for it. It was on this trip that my now ex-husband asked me to marry him. I was over the moon. Everything he owned would have belonged to me legally after we got married. I did like him, but I wasn't going to marry someone just because of that and then suffer my whole life. I needed assurance that I was going to have a good life. I wanted an affluent life. I didn't want my children to suffer the way I did. Looking back now, I realize that my infatuation with him was more about the lifestyle he could provide me with than actual love. I ignored the warning signs and focused on the fantasy in front of me. We started the wedding preparations and my fiancé insisted on paying for everything. I was happy because I didn't have the money anyway. He told me to go all out. He said he wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams. Everything went really well. We got married in a lavish wedding. My life was nothing less than a fairy tale. I was living my dream. Little did I know, it was just the beginning of a tumultuous roller coaster ride. The first year of my marriage was nothing less than a scene out of a romance movie. My ex-husband used to pamper me so much. Everything I wanted, I got. One time I was scrolling on my phone and came across a designer dress which wasn't out in the stores yet. I showed the dress to him and asked him, "Isn't it pretty?" He asked me if I wanted it. I shrugged and said, "Why not?" 2 days later, the dress was delivered to me with a note from the designer itself. I literally felt like a queen. I felt like God was compensating for all the years of my childhood when I couldn't get anything. My husband was giving me everything there was. In our friends group, my wedding ring had the biggest rock. All the ladies would look at me with envy, and I cherished every second of it. My husband still used to disappear sometimes. He used to come home so late that it was almost morning. but I wasn't very worried about it. I just thought he must be partying with his friends or something. That sort of thing was common with players. I used to stay at home decorating my bungalow or go shopping with his credit card. I had ways to keep myself busy. I had more than most people did, and I enjoyed every bit of it. I had asked my husband to take me on a vacation. He agreed and told me we could go anywhere I wanted. I spent a week researching the perfect holiday destination for us and finally decided on Greece. I always wanted to go there since I was a child, but never had the money to go. The opportunity to go there was finally here. We decided on a 7-day holiday. I had booked the 5-star resorts and everything in Santorini. The trip was fantastic. We did wine tours. We did traditional sightseeing. Just when I didn't think I could be happier, my then husband surprised me with a cruise trip. I was really on top of the world, not knowing that I was going to hit the rock bottom real soon. The trip is my last happy trip with my husband. It was the last trip, in fact. Everything changed after that trip. We came back from the trip, and after a few weeks, my husband's behavior started to change. I didn't know what was wrong with him. I asked him what was going on, and he said he was worried for the next season. It made sense to me, so I let it go. He started coming home late more frequently than before. He was always out and never at home. We stopped spending time together. He also stopped giving me gifts. I felt really bad when that happened. Before the trip, he made sure to get me something once a week. But 2 months had passed, and he didn't mention anything. One day when I was in the kitchen cooking us lunch, he came and kissed me. I was surprised because we had stopped being affectionate with each other. He waited for a few moments and then asked me if he could borrow his credit card, as he had lost his and the new card was coming after someday. I loved that credit card. I could shop as much as I wanted with it, but I still nodded and then went to him and gave him his card. He kissed me on the cheeks again and then left the house. That was the first time he had asked for it, and I felt so upset that I didn't have the card with me anymore. Days passed like this, and every day I kept hoping that I would get my card back, but there were no signs that he was going to return it. I didn't want to ask for it because that would have seemed like I was only concerned about the money. My husband was never at home at that time. He would always tell me that something or the other came up and that he had to stay out. I started doubting that something was wrong. There were too many things to ignore at this point. My husband was always drunk. He would stay out for hours, and he didn't even talk to me. Plus, he had taken away my credit card. There were too many signs. I decided to find out the reason behind my husband's strange behavior. I called up one of our mutual friends and asked him if he knew why my husband was acting differently. He shrugged and told me he didn't know either. My husband hasn't hung out with him for quite long. I thanked him and ended the call. I was trying to figure out what could tell me the reason behind my husband's behavior. I thought of everything I could do. I even thought of hiring a private detective behind him to know the truth. I didn't want to spend money like that. I thought of other ways. One day when my husband was sleeping, I took his phone silently and took it to the washroom. He hadn't changed his password, thankfully. I checked his Instagram to see if he's in someone's DM, but found nothing. I also looked for any apps like Tinder and all, but again, nada. I was getting tired. I was sure his mind was somewhere else. I just had to find out where it was. I didn't have to wait a lot to know the truth. I found it out when I was least expecting it, and it was my nightmare. One day when I was bored at home, I thought of doing some online shopping. My laptop was discharged, so I took my husband's laptop, which was lying on the table in the living room. I opened the laptop and started browsing at Zara. I didn't find anything I liked, so I closed it. I was just about to shut off the laptop when I thought of clearing the history. My husband didn't like it when I used his laptop or phone. I opened the history and saw that my husband had last opened his internet banking website. Curiosity got the control of me, and I opened the website. His account was already logged in, thankfully. What I saw next shocked the fuck out of me. My husband's bank balance was in the negative. I froze at the spot, not understanding what was happening. How was this even possible, I thought. I thought there must be some mistake or some technical glitch. I refused to believe that this was the truth. I opened his account statement and checked where all his money went. Another shock came through me when I saw that large chunks of money were transferred to casinos. There were other random names that I wasn't aware of. Why would he give money to people in casinos, and that too in millions? It was a huge amount, even for him. I needed an explanation from him. Was he lending these people money? So many questions clouded my brain at that moment of time. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him, but got no response. My anger increased as time passed by. Finally, the night came and my husband came back home. I didn't wait any second longer then. I immediately asked where all the money went. He looked confused for a minute, but then his eyes fell on the laptop in the couch, and understanding was drawn on him. He knew how I knew. He got angry and told me that he had told me to stay away from his things and that I should stay within my limit. That angered me even more. I went up to him and told him to cut the bullshit and tell me honestly where all the money was. Till that point, I still had hope that he would give me some logical explanation about whether we actually still have the money. I was waiting for him to tell me that. I didn't expect to hear what he told me. He told me that all our money was gone. He was on the verge of going bankrupt. I asked myself how it all happened. He then collapsed on the couch and started rubbing his eyes. He then told me everything that was happening for the last few months. He said that he was hanging out with a few of his friends at a party where someone made a bet. My husband won that bet and some money with it. He started going to casinos with those men and used to bet a lot of money, thinking he would win so much money there. In the beginning, he used to win, so he kept playing. Then he started to lose. He didn't give up then. He thought if he kept playing, he would win back the money he had lost. This wasn't just a day or two. He did this for months, and now we were broke. I couldn't believe it. All my dreams about living a luxury life broke just because my husband was a stupid man and a gambler. That too, a bad one. I felt like slapping him or doing something to him to make him realize what he had done to me. I couldn't look at his face any longer, so I left the living room and went to my bedroom and locked the door. I needed space for him. He got the hint and didn't try to come closer to me. I was in my bed when I heard the sound of the engine and him driving off. I was filled with rage because of his actions. All my dreams, everything I wanted in life was gone in a moment because of him. I don't. I've been so angry in my life like I was at that moment. I didn't have money in my childhood, but that was different. I came from a middle-class family. This time, I was going broke because my husband was a stupid man. I was consumed with rage that I didn't even think anything. I just texted George, his personal trainer. George had been my husband's personal trainer for a very long time. He was his trainer from even before we started dating. When I started dating my ex-husband, he introduced me to George one day. George was good-looking. He seemed extra friendly to me, quite flirtatious. I just laughed then, but my husband had noticed it too. After George left the house that day, he told me that he didn't like him near me. I made it my mantra to stay away from him from that day onwards. I was hell-bent on doing everything that my boyfriend liked. I wanted him to consider me as his wife, and I did everything for that. Whereas my husband couldn't even take care of the money that was supposed to take us and our future children. I was done with doing what he wanted. I wanted to do something wrong, something bad to him. What could be worse than his wife sleeping with his personal trainer behind his back? I thought of George first because I knew how much it was going to hurt my husband that his wife went to George. Him and George were always in some kind of competition, and my husband loved to win. I was going to make him lose. Another reason for choosing George was that I knew it wouldn't be very difficult to convince me. He would be ready for it as soon as I asked him. I also had a hope that maybe George would save me from getting broke. Just as I expected, his reply came almost immediately. I had texted him if he could meet me. He replied telling me sure and asking me where I want to meet. I thought about it for a moment. I didn't want to meet at home because my husband could come home anytime. I thought of a hotel on the outskirts of the city. Noon we know visited there, so there were slim to zero chances that someone we knew could see me there. I texted him the location and told him to meet me there the next day. I had told him that we'll meet at the restaurant of the hotel. His text came telling me that he'll be there waiting for me. The next day, I got dressed in a dress which showed all my curves and a lot of cleavage. I needed to look hot if I wanted to achieve what I had in mind. I did subtle makeup with bold, pouty lips. I didn't even need to make any excuse to go and meet George because my husband wasn't even at home. He hadn't come home since the previous night after he told me all about gambling. I didn't care either. It was best if there was as much distance as possible at that time. I reached the restaurant on time, but I didn't go inside immediately. I waited for a few minutes. I didn't want to appear too interested in this. I had to have the upper hand with George. I wanted him to pursue me. One thing I had learned about men was that they didn't like anything they got too easily. I wasn't a fool to be one of those things. As I made my way to George, he looked up, and when he saw me, he smiled. He also checked out with an appreciating gaze. I was enjoying all of it. We settled down and started talking. It was a normal conversation. The normal, "What's up? How have you been?" We got comfortable with each other quite soon. After some time, George asked me how my husband was doing. He told me he heard somewhere that my husband made some financial decisions. I thought about how everyone knew about it except me. I looked at George. It was clear he knew about the gambling. He was just being subtle about it. I took that opportunity and played my victim card. I got emotional as I told him how it feels like everything is lost for me now. He looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. I lied to him about how it's not even the money. What hurts me the most is how I have lost my husband now. In the back of my mind, I was calculating that if the news is spread among people, that means that we are at the end of the rope only. I needed to find a way out very quickly. I smiled at George, hoping that he would be my way out. After a few drinks, we got the bill and George paid for it. I told him that I think I'm going to stay in the hotel only for the night as I don't want to go home. He nodded in understanding and then told me that he will drop me to my room. We walked to my room together after talking to the receptionist. George told me good night and to call him if I needed something. I nodded at him and muttered a thanks. He was just about to leave when I kissed his cheeks. He looked at me in confusion just for a second, and before I could say anything, he entered the room and kissed me back. We didn't stop at just kissing. We did more, and finally slept with each other. I felt odd satisfaction that night. My husband broke all my dreams, and I broke his pride. He liked to show off to George that he had me. It wasn't true now. I slept at night comfortably. I had a way to still make my dreams come true. The next morning when I woke up, George was still asleep. I got up and went to the window. I was looking at the view when George came from behind me and hugged me. He wished me good morning and kissed me. We had coffee together, and it was finally time to go back home. Before we left, George asked me directly if this was a one-time thing or if I'd like to continue this. I smiled at him and told him that I would like to see more of him. He seemed happy. I came back to an empty home. My husband still hadn't come back home. The bed was just like I had left it. I changed my clothes and switched on my laptop. I started researching George. I wanted to know if he had the means to make my dream come true or not. To my surprise, a happy one, he did have the means. He was not just a personal trainer to my husband. He was also a landlord. He owned many shops in the city which were in the prime area. He also had many investments which gave him good returns. I was really happy with what I had found. This was all I wanted. I was not going to let my husband's stupid decisions ruin things I wanted for years. I thought that I wasn't going to waste my prime years with my husband struggling again. I deserved better, and George was going to provide that for me. My affair with George continued. I didn't text him first after the night. I waited patiently for him to text me back. I waited for the whole night just looking for his texts and got really disappointed when they didn't come. My husband had come back home at that time for a short duration. We both didn't talk to each other. Neither he did try nor did I make an attempt. He simply came, took a shower, and then left after some time. This home had become a hotel for him. I wasn't complaining though. I thought the more we stayed away from each other, the better it was. However, he finally texted me after a week. I was over the moon. He told me he got caught up with some work and that's why he couldn't reach out to me earlier. I told him it was all cool. He then asked me if I would like to meet him again. I replied after some time, even though I had seen the texts instantly. I agreed to meet him. He texted me the location and the time we were supposed to meet. I got ready and then went to meet him. He was already waiting for me. He smiled at me like he was happy to see me there. We went to the suite he had booked for us. We spent the whole night together. In the morning, I told him that I should go home, but he insisted on staying longer. I was more than happy with listening to that. We spent the whole day with each other. My affair with George continued for around a month. Sometimes my husband would be home and I couldn't meet him. George used to get upset with that. One day he told me that I should divorce my husband. He told me that he would take care of me. He didn't like to meet me secretively. He said that I shouldn't waste my time with a loser like my husband. George also told me that the health of my husband wasn't looking very good, and it seemed like he was not going to do well in the football season that was coming up. My husband was in his late 20s at that time. He was just about to turn 30. I calculated that there wasn't much hope for him in football anyway. All the money he had made was already gone. Our home was going to get seized too if he didn't return the money to the bank. I didn't think his family was going to help him out either. I told George that I was thinking about it. He told me that he was there for me and knew good lawyers as well. I took George's help and got the divorce paper ready from the lawyer he had told me about. The papers were served to my husband. When I came back home after meeting George, I found my ex-husband on the couch. His eyes were red. He looked so angry. I saw the envelope in his hand and knew that the divorce papers had made him this angry. I didn't say anything to him and went to the kitchen. He followed me to the kitchen and asked me what the fuck was I doing. I told him I didn't know what he meant and tried to go to the bedroom. He didn't let me go. He held my wrist tightly and asked me what was wrong with me and all. When I didn't say anything to him, he got even more upset and started breaking things from the counter. I told him that I don't want to do anything with him and the mess he had made. I texted George to pick me up from my house. When George entered the house, my husband's anger intensified. He started cursing loudly and asked what George was doing here. I went to George, kissed him in front of my husband quite passionately, and told him that I had called him here. My husband got speechless after what we saw. George smirked at him. I told him to sign the papers. I still remember how heartbroken he looked. I almost felt bad for him, but the calculating side of me overpowered me, and I walked away. He signed the papers shortly. I had moved in with George. Our divorce process didn't take much time. I got another surprise after our divorce was finalized. Just after our divorce, the football season was on. I had expected that this would be my husband's last season, and that he was going to perform really bad. But to my and everyone's surprise, he performed excellently well. He made the most money in that season. I suddenly started feeling bad for what I had done with him. He made a mistake, but he also had the capacity to correct his mistakes. With the money he was making, he could easily repay the loan that was on him in a very short time. I started regretting everything that I did with him. George had a stable life, but he didn't treat me like my ex-husband did. If I asked him for a vacation, he would instead tell me that we could spend that money on buying a property. That property would give us rent, whereas vacation will be a waste of money. His money was of no use to me. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't use it. He controlled his money to every last buck. If I needed something, he used to ask me how much it cost. If something cost around $59, then he would give $59 only. He also had a habit of asking for bills. Living with George was like I was back in my childhood. Except this time, it was worse because I could see the money but not touch it. I soon realized the grave mistake I had made by leaving my husband when he needed me. I should have been there for him, but I gave him more troubles and heartache. I wanted to go back to him, but I knew he wouldn't take me back after that show. I had put up with George in the living room. I got to know that he had stopped gambling for good and was doing a lot of work to get his life on track. His family had also helped him a lot. It wasn't much of a big deal to them. They were wealthy people. When I got my divorce, my husband's financial condition was really bad, and therefore he didn't have to give me anything. But now he was getting everything back in his life. The money, and after the last season he played really well, he was getting his fame back as well. Whereas I had lost everything. I lost my husband and my home. The guy who was supposed to give me everything turned out to be useless as well. Even though I was always calculating, all my calculations resulted in me getting nothing. I finally got tired of chasing my dreams and decided it was best to just forget it. There wasn't much for me in the city. Everyone in the football community hated me. I was the woman who had left her husband in his bad times and cheated on him, that too with his personal trainer. I didn't blame them for their hatred for me. They were right only. I just couldn't bear all that anymore. I ended my relationship with George. He wasn't very upset about it. It seemed like he wanted that as well. I left the city and went back to my childhood town. Before going back, I thought of meeting my ex-husband once, just to tell him goodbye. I went to the house which used to be mine. He opened the door, and as soon as he saw me, his face turned red from anger. He was about to shut the door on my face when I told him to just listen to me once. I begged him and he stopped. I told him that I was sorry for everything I had done. He laughed at my apology. He told me that I had done him a favor by leaving him and showing him my true colors. He said if I hadn't shown him who I really was, he never would have thought that I was such an evil person. I listened to him because his anger was justified. I told him that I was leaving the city and going back to my town. He mocked me how George couldn't keep me satisfied. When I went to his house, I had a bit of hope. I had hoped that maybe he would see me and forgive me, but he was still angry with me. He looked at me like he hated me. I started crying, hoping that maybe that will soften him up a bit. He just told me with plain hatred how it was good that I was leaving the city because he never wanted to see my face again. I told him goodbye and left his house in tears. All the hope I had inside of me was finally dead. I took the bus and went to my town. The aftermath of what I had done followed me even back there. Everyone in the town somehow knew what I did in the city, and everywhere I went, I was given judgy looks. I finally made peace with the fact that what's done was done. I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wished for it. I started living in a small apartment because even my parents felt ashamed to be seen with me. The apartment was the size of the walk-in closet I had in my big house. I started taking local jobs. Whoever needed an assistant, I was up for it. It took me time to get used to it. I finally started working as a hairdresser, and that job stuck with me. It has been almost a year since I moved into my town. I feel guilty for a lot of things I have done. But the one action that I regret every day is what I did with my ex-husband. He didn't deserve that. The way I ruthlessly cheated on him was really low. If I could go back in time, I would never go to that hotel or text George. Like I said in the beginning, it is hard for me to share the worst part of me with strangers on the internet. But I felt like I needed to share this with someone. I don't have any friends or anyone like that with whom I can openly share why I did what I did. The best bet seemed this. It definitely feels better now that everything is in the open. I just hope that the guilt and regret goes away one day as well. The burden of it feels too heavy. Update. Thank you for all the comments and likes. When I wrote this post, I didn't expect that it would be this number of people. I'm thankful to all you who read my story. Also, to the people who are calling me a gold digger and names, I won't defend myself to you. You are somewhat right. I have always kept money as my priority rather than love. I do realize that the reason why my romantic relationship didn't work out with my ex-husband or with George was that I prioritized money over love. I only chose them because they had money. Anyways, thanks again to all of you for listening to my story and sharing your opinions.